Welcome to our first Crease Careers Alumni webinar. Today we're excited to speak with two alumni who are currently working for the U.S. Department of State in diplomacy, and they're stationed in Kazakhstan and Poland. So first I'm going to introduce our two guests today. One is Lance Erickson. Can you say hi, Lance, so the camera will go to you?
Hello, everyone.
Lance received his MA from Crease in 2001 and is currently serving as the Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer of the Public Affairs section of the U.S. Embassy in Astana, which was recently named Nur Sultan. There he facilitates academic, cultural, and professional exchange programs throughout Kazakhstan. Prior to his post in Kazakhstan, Lance was the Vice Consul at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And before that, he worked in higher education administration as the Assistant Director for the Center of Slavic and East European Studies at the Ohio State University, as the Assistant Director for Student Services at the as the Assistant Director for Student Services at the Russian East European Institute at Indiana University. His first job out of Crease was in the private sector as Country Director for Ukraine of Sidvim, a medical training and sales company. I believe he was also posted in Bulgaria, so I think there's a lot more, to his career even than I can say in this short introduction. I also wanted to introduce our other guest, Brian Selman. Can you say hi, Brian?
Hello.
Brian received his BA here at UT in Russian language and culture and went on to get an MA at Crease, which he completed in 2014. He was one of our star students, as I'm sure you were too, Lance. But Brian graduated more recently, so I remember him well, teaching him in my classes. Brian currently serves as the Russian Language Foreign Service Consular Fellow at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. Prior to that, he worked as the Senior Study Abroad Advisor at Texas Tech University. And Brian, I believe, just passed the oral segment of the Foreign Service exam, and so he will be launching a career in foreign service, much as Lance has. So I'd like to start off with a few questions for each of them. And if you see me looking up, it's because I'm seeing them on a screen that's up there. But so if the eye contact looks weird, that's why. So I'm going to start off with a few questions, and then we're going to open it up for questions to the audience. So any questions you have, just be thinking about it, and you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom as you think of them. As you do it, please try to direct them to one or other of the panelists or both. So if you have a question for Brian, say Brian. If it's for Lance, you can say Lance. Okay, so my first question is in two parts. Walk us through your time at Crease, or walk us through kind of your educational to career path. So from your time at Crease to where you are now, what did you study at Crease? What were your career aspirations at Crease? And then what did you do right after graduating? And how did you get to where you are now? So essentially, kind of in a nutshell, what was your educational and professional path? Lance, do you want to go first?
Sure, it would be my pleasure. First off, I want to say thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you and to see people down in Austin again. I really enjoyed my time there at Crease. Granted, it was some time ago, but I still remember it quite fondly. And so I'm happy to say a few words about what I studied while I was at Crease. I was mostly focused on Russian language, Russian Soviet history. So I took a couple classes with Dr. Wynn, took some politics, took some culture classes, obviously, with Dr. Garza as well. And my thesis focused on conscription into the Soviet and Russian military. And I looked at different issues like hazing and some other cultural aspects that I thought were extremely interesting at the time. And while I was in the Crease program, I don't think I had a clear career goal plan in mind, which looking back, I wish I had. I was probably thinking something along the lines of working somewhere in the government, but I didn't really know for sure. And so immediately after graduation, I took this opportunity, as you mentioned, in the private sector, working for a small medical training company that would bring doctors and professors and medical professionals from the United States to Ukraine, Russia, the Baltics, the former Soviet sphere, to do training programs for local doctors and to sell medical products. And so immediately upon leaving Greece with my MA, I went to Kiev, and I helped set up the office there, hired staff. Unfortunately, I had to fire some staff, set up operations, and eventually we also opened an office in the Baltics. And so my time would be split 1 week in Ukraine, 1 week in Lithuania, running operations and managing both offices. And so I did that following graduation for about almost 5 years, for a little over 5 years, before I decided that, I was getting a little bit older, wanted something a little bit maybe more stable. The Orange Revolution was just taking place in Kiev outside my door. And so I decided to come back, and that's when I got the job at Indiana University working in higher education. And so from that, I moved on to Ohio State. And then in 2012, I joined the Foreign Service.
All right, Brian, you have a little bit of a shorter career path, but nevertheless, do you want to talk a little bit about your time here at UT and then?
Sure. So 2011, I come from Deep East Texas and land in Austin. It was a huge culture shock. Beat at Russia, get an experience. I also wanted to study abroad. I wanted some time in Russia to work on my Russian. So sophomore year, I study abroad. I come back and I think maybe I should also sort of diversify my portfolio, not just Russian. So I added international relations. And then I did a joint thesis between Crees and international relations on the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is the post-Soviet world's sort of answer to the EU, and how Soviet nostalgia affects their politics. I wanted to do a grad degree, but graduating, I needed a year to figure things out. I wanted to work on my Russian some more, so I went and taught English in Moscow for a year. And while I was there, I applied to grad programs. Crees offered me the position. So I came back and I hit Russian all the harder. I really wanted to focus on my Russian. I wanted to get up to advanced mid at least. Actually, I wanted to get to superior. But anyway, so worked on my Russian, added Ukrainian, took some Ukrainian, and my thesis was focused around censorship of pro-Ukrainian hip hop artists within Russia. So how culture and politics, clashed in this case. And following my graduation, I wanted just something that looked professional while I was trying to get into a government job. It takes a long time to get hired by the government. I had already applied for the Consular Fellows Program a year before I graduated. I'd been accepted half a year before I graduated, but then there was a hiring freeze. There were problems with security clearances. I had all these Russian contacts, so it took a long time. And while I was at Indiana during the summer after I graduated studying Russian, I got accepted to be a study abroad advisor at Texas Tech, where I stayed until I came on as into Warsaw. And let's see, I think that's everything.
I have a little follow-up question. You both got these very, multidisciplinary, I guess you could say, educations here in our MA programs. I mean, you studied history, you studied culture, you studied language. How important was it to have that broad-based area studies background in Russia, in the former Soviet Union, to you on your career, both in terms of getting the jobs you got and in terms of actually doing the jobs you got? How much does that training come into play? Lance.
Well, I can go ahead and start on that. And I would say that I think that helped me immensely, both in my previous careers in the private sector, higher education, and in getting my job in the Foreign Service with the State Department. I think having such a wide range of knowledge about the region, about an area that is a vital security interest, it was just so beneficial that it really opened a lot of doors for me. I would probably say the one thing looking back, if I had to do it again, I might try to marry that up with more practical courses as well. And I know one of the things that's very popular right now are some of the dual degrees where you do the area studies in addition to, say, a public policy, an MPA degree, where you would gain some of those practical skills like how to budget, how to put together proposals for grants, things like that. And I would say that was probably the one thing that I was lacking, that if I had to look back and do this again, I would say if I was able to add that, my career progression probably would have been a little bit faster. where I would have gained some of those skills at the graduate school level rather than in my career later on.
Brian?
Let's see. As for me, yes, you have to have a broad base, I think, unless you're going to silo yourself within one discipline and be an academic and get a PhD. Even then, I think it helps to have an interdisciplinary approach. CREES is interdisciplinary, and I think no matter what kind of job you do, it's much more useful to have that broad base, have skill sets, have perspectives that you can tap into. And yeah, I would say that one thing I wish I had worked on a little bit earlier, as I was graduating, I tried to add it, but I don't think I was fully, I don't think I fully succeeded. I wish I had taken time, like Lance said, to get some practical skills in. I really wanted to do statistics so I could do analysis. That would have opened up some doors for me. I heard once, you should always take an accounting class because we have a great accounting program and everyone needs an accountant. I'm not sure I agree with that because there's going to be someone who actually has a degree in that could do that job. But there's some hard skills that I wish I would have developed, mostly with statistical analysis. I think I could have done more in poli-sci. Instead, I was sort of stuck in history and cultural studies when I graduated. If I wanted to pursue academia, that's what I should have done.
Okay, my next question is, I'd like each of you to walk us through a kind of day in your life, a typical day at work. So I guess so we can kind of know what you actually do in your job on a daily basis, and what you like about it.
Sure. And again, I can just probably go with what my schedule looked like today as a typical, I guess it was a Thursday, where at most embassies once a week or so, you will have a weekly meeting with the ambassador and a lot of the other sections in the embassy. And today was our day for that. And so it's a nice chance to kind of get to know what else is going on in the embassy, in the country, and maybe there could be something new that has come up that you can find areas for collaboration with some of the other sections across the embassy. And then I spent most of my morning working on some budget analysis and proposals. Actually, we're already looking at budgets down the road for fiscal year 2021 and beyond. And so, as I mentioned, it would have been nice if I'd had some budgeting training prior to joining the State Department. It's one of the areas that, as Brian mentioned, some of those hard skills are useful no matter what job you're doing. And so I've been able to use some of my budgeting experience in my current position, which has really served me well. I spent a couple of hours working on some speaker request programs where we're trying to bring some different American speakers to Kazakhstan to share experiences and to put on different programs. One, it sounds like might be of interest to Brian with his hip hop graduate work that he was doing. We're actually planning a hip hop 4th of July this year. And so I am currently working on bringing a hip hop group from the United States who will come and perform at our 4th of July celebration and do some workshops with some of the choreography academies, some of the other schools and different places here in Kazakhstan to share some of our culture and to do some modern dance techniques. The rest of my day was actually spent doing something else kind of cool. One of the other speakers that we're looking to bring, this is the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and our big focus this year is a focus on STEM, space exploration, and especially empowering girls through STEM. And so I'm working currently on trying to find a couple of astronauts that we will work with NASA to bring over to do programs, meeting with school kids, meeting with local aeronautic engineers and space programs to share knowledge again and to kind of promote American innovation, American technology. And so, when you think about some of the stuff that you're doing all day, if you ever thought that you would join the State Department to be thinking about astronauts and hip hop artists, it probably wasn't something that I would have thought about. But, there's a lot of work that goes into the planning and the preparation for those types of programs. And it's not necessarily as glamorous as everybody might think when you're sitting at your desk, sending lots of emails, working on budgets and things like that. But that really is a typical day. And then you're spending hours and hours answering emails, trying to make sure that we're making our necessary communication back to DC and to our interlocutors here in Kazakhstan.
Well, that sounds like an exciting day to me. It sounds like a lot of really interesting projects you have going on. Brian, what's going on in Warsaw?
Okay, so Lance's job is really cool. He puts on a lot of really cool events. And when I originally was thinking of the Foreign Service, I was picturing myself as a public affairs officer. And it wasn't until I actually worked in consular, I thought this is a better fit for me. And so my day, Lance has done my job before, just in Moscow. Typically, when you start in the Foreign Service, you are a vice consul. That's what you do first. You do a consular tour, and you issue visas typically, or because non-immigrant visas are usually the biggest units, that's usually the job you're doing. So what that looks like here in Warsaw is you come in around 7:30, and you open up, which means all the people are lined up outside, cold, rain, whatever, they're there. And they filter in, there's some intake, they take their fingerprints, and then they line up to have interviews with us. So everyone in Warsaw speaks Polish, except for me. I have a waiver, I don't speak Polish, I only speak Russian. And so with the drawdown a couple years ago, the Russian government kicked out a lot of our diplomats. And because there aren't as many consular services in Russia, those Russians are going elsewhere to get visas. And so a lot of them are coming to Warsaw. And so I'm assigned to not that many, around 20 to 40, depending on the day, Belarusians, Ukrainians, and Russians. So Russian-speaking people. There is one consular officer in Minsk. So sometimes their wait times can be a little bit long. And then with Ukraine, that's a whole nother story. But with Russians, I get a lot of people from Moscow, St. Petersburg, but also all over, places you wouldn't expect. So my typical day is 1 to 3 minute interviews with these people. Where are you traveling? Why are you going there? Who do you know there? Have you ever been? There's a lot of, it's very fast, it's very rapid. I'm using my Russian, but I'm using very consular Russian. We get a little bit of training in that before we go, so I can really, ask these types of questions well. However, some of the things like discussing academic topics that I used to be a little bit better on, those skills have rusted a little bit. I need to work on those more. And because there aren't that many Russian speaking people here in Warsaw, I don't get that much practice outside of the section. But yeah, so interviews, and then I'm jumping off the visa line. So I'm stepping away from my window whenever something comes up. So you take different portfolios in consular. And so right now I'm the fraud prevention manager, which means we have to screen a lot of problematic visa applications. And so I'm in charge of a lot of these things like I'm talking about, statistical analysis, checking travel history, looking through our records, using our tools. And so I hosted a big meeting yesterday with some of our partner embassies at the embassy here. And so there were some management issues I needed to email back and forth with someone in management. So that was my morning. And then the afternoon was more fraud prevention stuff. We got a letter from an anonymous source that was talking about the certain company that may be misusing visas and bringing illegal workers to America. So I was running checks on them. I was corresponding with people from our partner embassy. And then we had our meeting where we met with the consular section. Lance talked about that meeting where people in all the sections talk about what's happening in the embassy and brief the ambassador. So I'm sort of low man on the totem pole. I'm not usually invited to that, but they have to have someone taking notes. So usually they tap someone like me to go in there and take notes. So I briefed the consular section on what's happening in the country. And then I rushed out exactly at 4:15 to get back for this webinar.
Excellent. Well, if some of our Zoom audience wants to write some questions in the Q&A board, we can take those. I don't see any right now though, so I'm gonna ask one more, but you guys can go ahead and start posting up some questions if you have some. I was kind of talking to Brian before we started, and I got fascinated, and a little bit with Lance too, about this idea of posts, of where you're posted, how that works. Like what, I guess you get to put in your requests and how those sort of get filtered and what are considered hardship posts and that kind of thing. Do either of you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, can people be pretty sure they'll get posts in the former Soviet area, or will they maybe end up somewhere else completely random?
Hey Lance, do you want me to talk about Flag Day and you can talk about like third tour, fourth tour, sort of stuff?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay. So the big time is your first post, of course. And so When you get into the Foreign Service, there's a 6-week course, the orientation course called A100. You're with between 50 and 100 people that are all joining just like you, all different types of tracks, so political, public diplomacy, consular management, and economic. And you're just getting to know what is Foreign Service like. What are some HR things you have to get ready, like moving and transportation and training and things like this. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, after you've bonded as a group, there's Flag Day. It's like graduation. You're graduating from the Foreign Service Institute in a sense. You may have more training afterwards, but you're getting your assignment. And so prior to this day, you're doing research in the Foreign Service Institute library. If you have a spouse, you're working with them. You're reading all the reviews, which is post info to go. It's information from other people who've served there about the post. You're looking at different housing types. If you have children, you're looking at schools. You're looking at what are some problems like transportation or air quality. What is a typical day like in certain sections? So these reviews are given on a voluntary basis. So it's just whoever decided to leave a review. So you're doing all this research. You meet with your career development officer for a few minutes, and you have your list. You've ranked all however many countries, there are as many posts as there are people in the class, so between 50 and 100, and you rank them based on high, medium, low. And they always tell you to hope for a high, expect a mid, and prepare for a low. And so you rank them. The career development officer decides for everyone what post you get, and then you're told your post at Flag Day. They go alphabetically by country. They call out the country name, the flag goes up on the screen, and then they call your name. So Warsaw, Poland, Brian Selman. And then you go up and you're kind of in shock because you're just getting a very big life-changing event just happened. You shake hands and you take your picture, and then you sort of go sit down stunned. And so the first one's the big one, that's Flag Day. It's a huge deal. And for their second tour, a year after, so you do a 2-year tour when you're an entry-level officer, it's all by email. It's a similar process, but there's no big shebang. And then it changes third tour and after, and Lance can talk about that.
Sure. And before I get started, Brian, I was just curious, how soon in Flag Day did you hear your name called?
Well, Warsaw, Poland's pretty far down. Well, Poland, I guess, is actually in the middle. There were 3 of us because I'm on this special Russian language one. So it's Yekaterinburg, Moscow, and Warsaw, Poland. So I was actually the first for Poland. And we were all kind of nervous because we knew each of us what our preferences were. I was really hoping for Warsaw because I wanted an easier transition into Foreign Service life for my new spouse. But yeah, it was a big day. It was really exciting, and I think it'll be so I just passed the oral assessment. I have a good score, so I feel like I'll get in within the next year. Whenever I have my real Flag Day that's not tied to a Russian post, it's going to be a bigger shock, I think, because I really won't know what to expect. 3 options are a lot different than 85 options.
Yeah. Well, and first off, congrats on passing the orals. That's a great achievement. We're glad that you're going to be joining in this. And so my Flag Day experience was slightly different. I was actually about the 4th or 5th one out of 93 people who found out that I was going to Sofia, Bulgaria. And so not only were we ecstatic that we were going to a nice East European post, getting to spend a couple of years in the Balkans, but then all the stress that we were just kind of envisioning for the rest of the Flag Day, we were able to just sit back and relax and be happy for all our friends who got good postings. And so we had a really good Flag Day experience. And since I came into the service with the Russian points, I already knew that I would be having a dictated second tour where I would be doing Russian and consular. Because my first tour in Bulgaria, I was actually the press attaché in Sofia, which was a great experience. And so I was just finishing A100, starting Bulgarian training when I found out what my second post was going to be. And we found out that we were going to be going to Moscow. So it was a little strange to be learning Bulgarian, trying to forget all of my Russian, knowing that in 2 years I was going to be going back to Moscow to do a consular tour. And so it was a little bit, I think that's probably not it's not your typical first and second tour, how quickly you would find out about that. But as Brian mentioned, once you get to beyond your second tour, it actually becomes, it's not a dictated process. You actually bid for the different jobs that you will be looking for. And so the way the system works is you have access to every single job in your specialty at your grade that will be open at the time that you're looking to transition. And the process, it's very stressful. It's very nerve-wracking. And as Brian mentioned, you're doing a lot of homework trying to figure out, where's the best post, where are the best schools, where's the best fit for not just for you and your career ambitions, but especially for your spouse, if you have children, and what's going to be the best for your family. And so the process is, it's a lot of corresponding with the different posts to find out about the jobs, to see if the portfolio is a good fit for you, and trying to find the right fit that you will be happy with, that your family will be happy with, and that's going to help you in your career. Because the Foreign Service career is definitely a long game, and depending on how quickly somebody wants to move up the ladder, that is when, as Dr. Newberger mentioned, that's when you might want to consider some of the more hardship locations, where it's a little bit more dangerous, or in some cases you have to go what's called an unaccompanied tour, where your family does not travel with you. And so depending on what your long-term career goals are, it really shapes how you do this bidding process that I went through a couple of years ago. And it's one of the good things about the State Department, but it's also one of the stressful parts, that our jobs really do change every 2 to 3 years, where you're not only changing post, you're changing portfolio, sometimes you're changing cone. You can do an out of cone tour, and it really keeps things from getting too stagnant. And you don't get a whole lot of moss growing underneath your feet, because every couple of years you're picking up, you're moving, and you're changing portfolios. You're often changing, learning a new language. And so the process is really, it's shaped by your experience and what languages you have. And so, if you come into the service and you speak a language like Russian, there is a very good chance that you will be serving a certain number of tours in a Russian-speaking post. It is not guaranteed that it will be your first tour. I had so many colleagues who had a language, whether it was Chinese or Russian, and they did not get that for their first post, but they did get it for their second post. And so for people in the Russian kind of team here at State, it's not that big of a community, and so you do bump into the same people over and over again. And so I know, Brian's now in Warsaw, but in a couple of years I'm going to see him in Moscow, and then a couple years from that he'll be in Kiev, and then he'll be on the Russia desk in Washington. And so you really do kind of shape your career with one big area of focus. And if you come in with Russian, that often is the area that you're going to focus on. But once you get past that, you really have a lot of say of where you're going to go. It's really competitive. But for example, we've done Bulgaria, Russia, and Kazakhstan. And so we're really looking at doing something a little bit different next time. So possibly an English-speaking post, or maybe something down in South America, Latin America. My wife is a Latin American specialist. And so, that's the other good side to this type of job is, you can kind of look at the globe and say, I would really like to go work in this part of the world. And at some point in your career, you can often make that happen.
Just a quick follow-up. Where is Kazakhstan on the hardship scale?
Sure. And I believe all this information is public information that you can find if you go online, that you can check. And so Kazakhstan is kind of in the middle of the hardship scale, where it's about a 20% differential. And a lot of that is usually, the hardship tours are usually based on safety and security. And so you would think of places like Iraq or Afghanistan, places like that. But the other side of that is places where the air quality is not as good. There's issues with corruption or crime, safety, maybe not in terms of, actual war activities taking place and hostilities, but street crime and safety for your families and things like that. And so Kazakhstan is right on the kind of the middle range, where it's not what you would consider like a nice, cushy European post that would come in at a 0 or a 5%. It's not easy being here and surviving, as we discussed earlier, that we just basically ended 6 months of snow coverage in winter here.
Okay, we have 3 questions in our Q&A panel. Brian, do you want to choose one of those to answer to start us off?
Sure, we can, I guess, start with the first one. That makes sense. So what advice do you have for students looking for a career in the Foreign Service, especially with the FS exam? So I just went through the exam process. I'm your man. I can answer on that. I think Lance might have a better answer for you in terms of what can students do to prepare themselves for foreign service life? I have some ideas, but he's been in the foreign service longer. He's seen more students come in. So I'll talk about the exam, and then maybe Lance can take the other part. Does that sound good, Lance? Okay, I'm just gonna assume it's okay. So FS exam is 3 parts. It starts with you have to be 21 to take it, or you can be 20, you have to be 21 whenever you get into the class. So 2021, you sign up online. It used to be free. I think there's a small fee now. You go to a Pearson Center where you take like an SAT or something, or GRE, and you sit down on a computer. It's based on sort of like a state standardized test. It's pop culture. So you might have a question on Drake or Rihanna or something. And then you might have a question followed up by mathematics. So quickly calculate how much tax this person has to pay on this product, followed by, hey, by the way, what's the capital of Bulgaria? And so it's kind of all over the place. It's very broad. And they're going to have questions about the government. They're going to have questions about what would you do in a management situation. They're very broad. It is kind of difficult to study for, but there's a study guide app. They use some old questions from a long time ago. I would say download that. I always do it every year before I take the test, just to kind of refresh my mind in what areas I'm weak in. So even things like how do you find how to change your paragraph indentations in Microsoft Word. So they'll have different choices on which commands you have to click in order. And so just sort of refreshing my memory at what I'm weak at. I always try to rememorize all the amendments and some big Supreme Court cases. But other than that, just take it. Just take it. Even if you're going to fail, take it. That's the first step. You take it, you know where you stand. My first year, the very first time I took it, I had my best score. It's only gone down since then, but I've still passed every year. I don't know what that says about me, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Your score is not that important. The big thing is the third step. But let's go on to the second step. So you pass the test, you studied a little bit, you're good at writing an essay, so you pass the writing bit. Now it's time for the QEP, I can't remember what Q stands for, but evaluation panel. And so they give you 6 short essays. They never change, at least in my knowledge. I've done the QEP every year, and I failed it 3 times, and I just passed the 4th time. So don't freak out if you don't pass it. It's not a big deal. Just try again next year. So the QEP, 6 questions. Each one's connected to a quality that they're looking for in you. These qualities are roughly connected to how they promote within the Foreign Service. And these qualities are also connected to what they call the 13 dimensions. When you go on the Foreign Service State Department website, all the tests are connected to the 13 dimensions. These are things that they set down in the early 2000s and they go, what makes for a good diplomat? The Foreign Service test used to be almost an IQ test. And they realized, there's some really smart people that are terrible diplomats. So how can we make it better where we actually get a good product? How can we identify the people that are going to have successful careers? And they came up with these 13 dimensions: leadership, integrity, quantitative analysis, writing skills, oral communication. You can find all of them online and descriptions of what they mean. And so the QEP is trying to get a rough idea of, do you have the experience necessary where you can shine, you can show these qualities. And so talk about a time you showed leadership, what were the steps you took, blah, blah, blah. You have 250 characters, like a long tweet to tell about a story. And they may change every year. You might keep the same stories. You might tweak them a little bit. So this is a really hard one. I think the reason I failed the first 3 times is I simply didn't have enough life experience. A lot of my stories were okay, but they were related to one time I was head of a club and I organized this nice event. Okay, but it's more impressive when I can say I was the coordinator for the largest international scholarship at Texas Tech University. They gave out $200,000 a semester. And I did have 1 or 2 student stories, but it was better rounded. And I was able to really shine with the actions I took. That's what you have to do, shine with the actions you took. And then the first question is always, why the Foreign Service and why the cone you picked? And so I was able to say, I'm contributing to national security and the economy, and think about not the travel, not the money, not the stability. Think about why the Foreign Service and not a travel blogger? What's the difference? Why do you want to serve your country? That's really the nail in the head. How do your ideals and why your motivation, how does it match with the Foreign Service's mission? And what you've done in the past, how does that prove that you're telling the truth, more or less, in a really short amount of time? So QEP, it's difficult. Try your best. There are forums online. You can get advice from other people. Just remember to make yourself shine and to always think about, if this sentence doesn't really make me shine in one of these dimensions, or if it's not really answering the question, it's just delete it, take it out, and find something better. Every single sentence should forward the story or make you shine, or ideally both. So you get through the QEP, congratulations, good job. Used to, they invited everyone who passed the test to just come on out to Washington, D.C. and do an oral assessment. You pay for the airline ticket, you pay for the hotels, but come on out. 10% pass rate back then, so really small. People, I think, were getting a lot of fatigue from flying out every year and failing. And so that's why they put the QEP section in a few years ago. This is to weed out people who just aren't ready. And once you get through the QEP, you have, it depends on the year on the hiring numbers, but you have somewhere between like a 20 to 40% chance of passing the oral assessment. So they have some good confidence in you. And there's so much information on the Yahoo groups. So all this was made back in the day in like, I don't know, 2002, for people prepping for the Foreign Service oral exam and the test. And there are just reams of strategies, materials, advice, journals. So people took it and they tell you what they think they did well on. So you don't get any feedback. You don't know what you were good at and what you were not. You get one final number and you're told which sections you passed. The oral assessment's 3 parts. So there's case management. That's really good for introverts who are good at writing. You get a bunch of information. You have to decipher it really quickly, a bunch of letters and maps and graphs and whatever. And you have to write a 2-page memo to the ambassador explaining what's happening and what your recommendations are to solve the problem. And so in 90 minutes, you have to comb through all this stuff, understand the situation, and get down to the action items. It doesn't matter about summary. They don't need to read who isn't liking whom. It's all about, how do you fix the situation? Okay, 2, group exercise. This is good for extroverts. So you have to have some sort of mix, likely, in order to pass all the sections. So here you get a project summary. You have 30 minutes to read the project, really understand it, or read some country information to understand the context. And then you have 15, 20, 25 minutes? 25 minutes, I think, to hash it out with your other 5 test takers and decide which projects are getting funded. You have this many projects and you have this much money. So you have to hash it out. Doesn't matter. It's not important if your project gets funded. What's important is that you understand the situation, you advocate for your project because you believe in it, but at the end of the day, you are going to support the US mission, whatever it may be, and you're going to support the projects. You're going to come together and collaborate to do what's best for the USA. 3rd section, maybe the scariest, is the structured interview. It's when 2 Foreign Service officers sit across from you, and first they start with motivation. So why do you want to join? Why the cone? What in your background has prepared you for this? Things like that. The second part is hypotheticals. So they give you a hypothetical scenario at an embassy. There's a disaster. There's some sort of, I don't know, but they give you a situation and you have to walk them through what you would do and why. So for that one, read some management texts, have a good idea, try to understand how the Foreign Service works. So maybe read Inside a US Embassy to understand what the procedure may be, what you haven't thought about. Anyway, you get through that. And then the 3rd section, it's personal stories that once again make you shine in these certain dimensions. And after all that, they tally your scores, they average them, they give you one number. If it's over 5.25 out of 7, it's a weird scale, you were Foreign Service quality, and you can move on to the register where they give out job offers based upon how high your score is. You can add to this number by testing in a language. The more critical it is, the better, or having veterans points. And sort of, you have 18 months to get a job offer. They go down, they have 10 consular positions. There are 40 people on the register. They just go down and invite you to the class. And then before you get on the register, though, you have to do the security clearance, the medical clearance, and suitability review. So that's the Foreign Service test. Those are some examples. Go to the Yahoo forums. And now I think Lance should talk, what are some qualities that students can work on, or what can they do to prepare themselves?
Sure. Well, that was a great description there. That was really nicely done, Brian. And I will just second making it through the orals is definitely one of the most difficult job interview processes you'll ever go through. The interview with the 2 diplomats who are not giving you any facial response whatsoever is definitely, you know, something I still wake up with cold sweats thinking about. So what I would just say, you know, since Brian covered everything so well there, I would just give a couple of words of practical advice. What I would say is if you're really considering a foreign service career, one of the best things you can do is sign up to do an internship. There's lots of summer internships and academic semester internships available through the State Department. And usually you have pretty wide range of places where you can go and you can work. They may not be funded, you may have to self-fund, but having the experience of working at an embassy, gaining that internship experience is so incredibly valuable. Not only does it give you the insight into what diplomats actually do, how the department works, but it really helps prepare you for going through that process that Brian just explained. And so if you haven't considered doing an internship, you know, it's such a good opportunity, and you gain such good practical skills. Even if you decide State Department's not for you, you want to go to the agency or DOE or private sector or somewhere else, they're still going to look fondly, they're going to look very favorably upon that internship experience that you're able to gain. Another thing that I would recommend is make sure you touch base with the diplomat in residence for the region. They are always good resources, somebody to talk to. You can usually find them online. They're always at the career fairs, and often they're willing to just sit down and talk with you about your experience, what you need to do to fill gaps on your resume, and, you know, as well as some test prep advice to help you get through the process. And maybe the last thing that I would say, you know, Brian mentioned that it's a really long process. I think my process altogether took about 2 years. I got onto the register and I was happy where I was working, so I put my candidacy on hold for several months. But it can be a very long process to get through the clearances and all of the tests and all those stages. And so you don't want to graduate with your degree and then start that process. If you're going to do this, try to start it as early as possible. If you're going to graduate school, start it the day you get to graduate school, because it's a long process and it might as well be taking place while you're getting your degree. If you're thinking, maybe I don't want to go to graduate school right away, I think that was one of the questions, you know, look at other opportunities where you can gain practical experience, language skills, time overseas, while you're trying to figure out where you're going for that next step, whether it's graduate school or the foreign service or whatever it might be. Brian mentioned he went and he taught English. It's one of the really great opportunities. There's lots of private companies that you can work for, or you can do it through the government. You can actually look at the Fulbright English Teaching Assistant Program. They're called ETAs. And we bring recent graduates all over the world to teach English in country. And currently we have, I believe, 5 in Kazakhstan. Next year, we're planning on bringing up to 15. And they're at so many different posts. And this is one of those opportunities where you would actually get paid to go and live and work overseas, to gain experience, to be involved in some indirect ways with the embassy. But again, it's something that you can do to help gain some practical skills, to gain some language skills, and to help figure out what direction you want to go next, whether it's graduate school or a foreign service test, whatever that might be. The big thing is just trying to fill in those gaps and not just be sitting there waiting for this foreign service process, because it's frustrating, it's long, and it's really easy to get discouraged if you're just waiting.
I would do have one note regarding the diplomat in residence. So when I was there, it was Floyd Cable. It's changed since then, but the diplomat in residence, I believe, is still at LBJ. So it's at the LBJ school. It's on your campus. That person is there. Email them if you are interested. They will tell you about events that are happening. They're happy to answer questions. And Floyd Cable helped me so much. He took time to talk about the oral assessment with me. I couldn't make the big event that he was hosting, and he was willing to sit down and gave me some very practical advice on sort of preparing mentally, not only for the oral assessment, but for the long ordeal it is to get hired. Because you can do everything right. You can get the right score and still not get hired because of hiring rates or whatever it may be. So definitely reach out to your diplomat in residence. I second that.
Well, thank you guys. This was great advice. We have one other question up there, Tracy Helms' question. Brian, do you want to address that one maybe?
Sure. For Brian or both, What is a surprising aspect that you learned about foreign service that people wouldn't know looking from the outside in? Are there any job roles that you didn't know existed, or any roles that you were hoping to work towards? Okay, so surprising aspect that I'll start with the first part. So looking from the outside in, at least when I first thought of the foreign service, I was thinking, wow, you get to live in a different environment. You get to meet with all of these local people and learn about their culture and really get to know the people and the language. Not really. A lot of times you don't actually have that much contact. There very much is an American bubble around wherever you are. And in one part, that's for necessity. You know, you need to be safe in certain places. And also maybe your language isn't up to snuff. And also you need to think about, you know, who are these friends? What are their connections? Could it be bad if you were connected to this person in the future? So things like that. That's one thing I hadn't really considered, because when I went for Russian, I went for it because it was very interesting to me, and I very much wanted to learn about the culture and the people and the language and everything about it. And I just dove in. And now that I'm in the foreign service, I realize I can't be so specialized. I have to be open to learning Spanish or Mandarin or whatever it may be, and being stationed wherever, and not being able to speak Russian for years. And you know, being able to understand that my dedication is no longer to Russia, or Russian language, or Russian culture. It's to the United States of America. And it's a little bit of a downer, maybe. You can definitely pick up some Dostoevsky if you're feeling, you know, sad and glum about not being close to your Russian peeps anymore. But it's definitely a realization that I've made. So that's the first question. Are there any job roles that you didn't know existed, or any roles that you're hoping to work toward? Absolutely. There are tons of contract workers in embassies across the world. And if you can't get in the foreign service, you're having a hard time, take the foreign service test, take the foreign specialist test. So that's for people working in IT, or working in, you know, you could be a secretary for the management section. You know, you may think, oh, what does a secretary do? You get so much job experience that you can use, relevant job experience. What happens when the management person is out of the office and something urgent comes up that you actually have, you know, you responsibility for and are qualified to do? You get some experience. It's a great, not only a great story for the oral assessment, but also it makes you a stronger person and a person more qualified. Remember, it's not about building a resume. They're not even going to read your resume. Not really. They don't put a lot of weight in that. It's all about the person that you developed through doing the things that you think are going to be impressive on your resume. Some of the most, I think, experiences that really shaped me I would never put on my LinkedIn. But anyway, I can talk about that at another time. So yeah, look at specialist positions. Look at the internships. The internships is a great way to get a look inside the embassy. There are a lot of roles at an embassy. Do your research. There are all sorts of different departments and agencies here. And is there anything I want to work toward? Right now, I really just want to get in for real. I'm on this contract, and I want to get into my entry-level position, and I'll feel a lot better once I'm a vice consul somewhere, officially in the career track. But long-term, I am very interested in American Citizen Services. I would very much like to be the chief of the section. So they're the people that help. There's a lot of routine things like approving passports, renewing passports, emergency passports, registering babies, American babies that are born abroad. But there are also things like death notices. So you're the person facilitating, contacting the relatives of someone who is deceased, so an American citizen who died abroad. You're the face of the US government during that time, this very critical time in their lives. You're also the person that visits an American citizen in prison or in jail while abroad, and you're the face of the US government, and they're going to remember you. This is a very critical time of their life. And so I want that experience, at least within consular. Beyond that, there are so many jobs in the foreign service, and I have access to so many of them. So, you know, beyond consular, I want to do a desk officer job. I want to go back to DC, and all the information comes in and I send it out in reports. I like writing reports. I would be great in political, but I also like face-to-face interviews and human interaction and some of the things consular does a lot of every day. So desk officer for sure. And we'll see beyond that. I'm not really sure. I'm just kind of looking at mid-level positions. I don't want to think too far down the road because life happens, you know?
Lance, do you want to take on those questions? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would love to. You know, probably the biggest surprise that I might say would be, you know, you come into this and you think that, you know, oh, I want to work hard and then I want to go and I want to serve at the embassy in Paris or in London. And what you end up finding out is that often it's not the location that you would expect is going to be the best job, the best posting for you. And I've heard it from so many people that, you know, people who go, they just dream, they've always wanted to go and serve in London. They get to London and they realize it's not exactly what they thought it was going to be. That, you know, you don't have the same kind of camaraderie, you don't have the same atmosphere, you don't have the same relationships with your colleagues, possibly because you're in London and there's so much to do once you leave the office. Whereas at a place like Kazakhstan or say Bulgaria, calling a couple places where I have the experience, you have more of a family feel at Post, and you get to know people better, you get to know their families, you become really fast friends. And when you leave those posts, you really have a strong connection, not only with the job, but with the local people that you spent so much time with and your fellow diplomats that you were working with. And you might not necessarily, you know, when you look at that list of all the different places, you might not expect that a place like Albania might be one of the most popular destinations. But you would be surprised to find out that it actually is one of the most popular places, because it's not necessarily the places that you would expect when you come in that you're really going to want to serve. So much of it has to do with the teams that are there, not only the local staff, how qualified they are, but also the ambassador and the upper level management. It really makes a difference. And the other thing that's kind of surprising is you will find out how small the diplomatic corps actually is. And they tell you this, I believe it's, Brian, you have to tell me, it might be the first day or the second day, but they always say, be nice to everyone, because you never know when you're going to bump into them again, because you will bump into them again. And strangely enough, I was in Bulgaria with somebody who graduated from my high school. I just found out this morning that somebody I served with in Bulgaria just arrived to Kazakhstan this week and is going to be working here. And so it's one of those things that you may not necessarily like everybody that you work with, but part of being a diplomat is making sure that you're professional enough that you maintain relationships, and that that person would never find out that you may not like them, because you never know when you're going to apply for a job and they will have some input on that. And so that's part of where this being a diplomat comes into it, where you really, it's such a small community. I don't know if the number of diplomats is actually public, but you might want to Google that. That would be, people are kind of surprised when they find out how few of us there actually are.
Okay, I have another question for you. What do you like most about your job, and what do you like the least? I mean, we've kind of heard some, but I mean, no job is all fun. We know that. I actually love Albania, so I would never think of it as a hardship post. Maybe some people do. But I mean, you know, for example, this idea that you don't know where you're going to end up. Do you like that, or is that something that's actually kind of a liability in your job? Or maybe you have other things you want to talk about along those lines.
I can start with this if that's okay, Brian. You know, when I started and I joined the service, recently married, didn't have kids, we were just excited about going everywhere and traveling every month, and didn't care about the schools. We just wanted to know where the best places were going to be for us to enjoy living. And now that I have two small kids, I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. What we're finding is that it's great. This, you know, part of the aspects that's so great is you get to travel so frequently, not only for work. You know, I was just in Kathmandu last week for work. Before that, I was in Dubai on vacation. You get so many opportunities for travel. But at the same time, when your kids get jet lagged or they're not enjoying the travel as much, you really, you know, your career can definitely change based on your family situation. And so what's something that is potentially one of the best aspects of travel. And a few years from now, when my kids are a little bit older, I just love the idea of taking them all around the world and showing them all of these amazing places. And the other thing I would say is probably one of the good things and one of the bad things is you get to learn a lot of foreign languages. And so for somebody who is a linguist who enjoys that type of thing, this is just, you can't be this type of career where we actually get paid to learn a foreign language and use it on a daily basis. It's just amazing. But at the same time, after you've done your second and your third language, and everything starts to become oatmeal, you get kasha up there in the brain when you're trying to think of, is that word Bulgarian, Russian, Ukrainian? What was that I just said? As you're in Kazakh class, trying to think of what you're supposed to be saying. It's a wonderful aspect of it. But unfortunately, for so many of us, we use these languages, and especially if it's a one-off language, you just get to use it for a few years, and then it just goes way to the back of the mind. And you might remember, you know, Zdravete and Kakste and things like that. But once you get beyond that, your Bulgarian is just, it's never coming out again. And so it's definitely one of the great aspects of it, but it can also make it can be very frustrating as well.
Brian, do you want to add anything to that, or do you have a different set of?
Sure. So it was kind of interesting. Most of the people joining Consular Fellows are younger. I think the youngest person was 22 in our class, and the oldest was probably mid-40s. And typically when you join the Foreign Service, your class is average 32, 33, something like this. So we're a little bit younger. And the first week, or maybe second week, they divided us into people with spouses or significant others and those without. And the top concern for all of the people with spouses was either spousal or happiness for their children. You're worried about schools, you're worried about, you know, I'm a Foreign Service officer, but what is my spouse going to do all day when I'm at the embassy interacting with people and, you know, making genuine relationships? And what if they're in a country where they can't work on the local economy? What if they're in a country where they can, but they don't speak the language? How are they going to stay happy? And what does that mean for your relationship? So that's one of the more challenging parts of the Foreign Service. There is such a thing as a tandem couple where two people are both Foreign Service officers, but coordinating both of your careers is very, very, very difficult. There are a lot of challenges, and a lot of tandem couples, it's difficult. That's all I'm going to say. You can research more yourself. So that's probably the worst thing about Foreign Service life, is just because not only are you, you know, leading towards this exciting future, you're also ripping apart your partner's roots and all of their connections back home. And that can be, it's a big responsibility because you feel responsible for taking the person there. So there are positives and negatives. As far as positives go, I mean, the job's amazing. Of course we get to travel. That's another part. You know, my wife had never left Texas really, and we've been to 10 countries already since I've been here, less than a year. There's tons of, you know, opportunities to travel. Interacting with the other culture, I think, expands your mind, makes you more flexible and more empathetic with others. So there are a lot of positives. It offers great job stability and a not bad living. They say, you know, we get paid the medium bucks, which is, you can see our pay scales online. Yeah, the work's great, but some of the outside the work is when it gets difficult sometimes.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you both and wrap up here. You guys have been an inspiration. I'm really actually envious. I'm thinking maybe I took the wrong career path. I could have been a Brian Selman, you know, or a Lance Erickson. It sounds like you have really exciting jobs and lives, and the advice you gave was great. I hope students can, if people came in late, you can listen to that. We've taped this, so you can watch the tape, which we'll post. If you have other questions for Brian and Lance, I think get in touch with us, and I'm sure we can put you in touch with them. I think one of the biggest takeaways were two. One, that this kind of well-rounded degree that you can get through CREASE, in which you learn languages, which are obviously critical, but also history, cultural studies, you know, political science, where you can get this well-rounded education around your focus region, in this case, Russia and the former Soviet bloc, I think is a really great foundation for a career. But I think, as they also said, having real experiences like doing internships, if possible, which might be unpaid at first, but you can get little pots of money from different entities on campus like CREASE, but also the Clement Center and the LBJ School. Getting these experiences under your belt that you can use to talk, you know, in the Foreign Service exam and other places, to talk about your own kind of potential and qualities for this job, may be the way to kind of get yourself into this kind of a career and make yourself professionally and academically ready for this kind of an exciting career in diplomacy. Do either of you have any last things you want to say? That's kind of all from me. Brian?
Yeah, I have one thing. So I graduated in 2017 from my master's program. It wasn't that long ago when I was sitting, I didn't have a job, and the foreign service is what I wanted to do, but how do I get there? And I think a lot of the students are in the same boat. You know, what are my experiences that would make me desirable? I would say it's very important to have a backup plan and a backup to the backup. When I graduated from my master's program, I think I had 13 plans, which may be a bit much, but I was applying, you know, first I was like, foreign service, okay, consular fellow, okay. After that, any type of government position, I'm applying to all sorts of organizations. Okay, what about NGOs? NGOs in Washington, that's a good one. Okay, what about just office jobs in Washington? Okay, what about universities in Washington? And just going down the list, writing out my applications, getting really good at using LinkedIn and writing a resume and getting your references. And I failed every time. And it wasn't until plan L, I think, when I finally said, I'll work at a university and get some experience in an international office. And so I became a study abroad advisor. You can do it, just plan. And that's my advice.
And I would say I graduated from Crease in 2001, so it is not a recent memory like Brian's. But what I would say is, you know, you definitely have to have those plans. I wish I had, you know, half of the plans that Brian had when I was graduating. But I would try to say, don't give up on the process. It's difficult with no matter what you're looking at, if you're looking at a government career. But try to take advantage of all the assistance that's available for you there at UT. Go to the career fairs, meet with the government recruiters, go to have them help you with job prep, with interview prep, with resume writing. Get as much experience and help as you can so that you realize that you're not in this process alone. And I think, you know, I would have been a lot more successful if I had taken advantage of some of those resources. And so if you don't know what's available, you know, talk to the Crease team, talk to the career services team, talk to the LBJ people, and try to find out what services are available. Meet with every recruiter you can, even if it's a government agency that you're not really interested in. You never know when job one is going to lead to job two. And, you know, as long as you're heading in the right direction in your career progression, gaining the skills you need for that ultimate dream job of yours, you know, try to make sure that you're just gaining whatever you can, gaining the skills to prepare yourself. So when that opportunity does come and you pass the orals, you have the interview, that you'll take full advantage of it.
Well, thank you both so much, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And this concludes our first Crease Careers Alumni webinar.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.